Hi there and welcome back to the So Many Creations YouTube channel. I'm Jessica. In this video, I'm going to walk you step by step through my brand new pattern, the Rue Bucket Bag. We'll talk about all the tips and tricks I have for you, including how to add snap together grommets, how to add purse feet, a handmade tag, and so much more. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the little notification bell so you'll know when new videos go up. So before we get started in making our Rue Bucket Bag, let's go ahead and look at the components. So this one right here, my main fabric, I use cork. This is the rainbow chevron cork. I have my open pocket out here, great for my cell phone or my keys, anything I need access to. For my accent, I use the raisin color, which is this really nice purple. That's gonna be for the top as well as my long adjustable handle. I have the rainbow chevron. I had a little extra, so I use that for my drawstring tab. And inside, there is a zippered pocket. This is gonna open up nice and big, okay? So it's very adjustable depending on what I need to carry with me that day. When I close that up, has this nice cinched look right at the top. I use the rainbow hardware on this one, and I also added some end caps, and I added the optional handle. Now, this is the optional short handle. This is something that you can decide if you want to do. The pattern itself, your requirements are going to include the adjustable handle in with your accent. You can do this entire bag out of cork like I did, or you can mix and match with fabric. The one I'm going to be working on today, I'm going to use wax canvas and cork. But included in your accent color is going to be this as well as the top. Included in your base, your main color, you're going to have the outside of the bag as well as this pocket, and you'll have the option to add this handle. It's totally up to you if you want that or not. It just gives you a short handle to carry the bag. And a lot of your high-end designer bucket bags often have an adjustable handle and a short handle. So it just kind of gives you a different look. In the Rue hardware kit, or if you've ordered a kit off of the website, this is not going to be included in it because this is an option. So you don't need to order any extra fabric or cork. That's going to be in your main yardage, but you would just need an extra set of swivel hooks. Again, totally up to you. I did it for this bag and I did not for this one. This one actually doesn't have the handle added on. I was finishing that up and I decided just to do the long adjustable on this one. So this, I use the Dreamcatcher cork and the caramel color, and I use the antique brass hardware. I've added my little end caps on here. I added a handmade tag, which is completely optional as well. I like to let people know that I made my bag. And I've added purse feet on. So you can see right here, I've added the purse feet to the bottom. In your pattern on the template that is going to cut this oval out, you do have a placement guide. So if you want to add purse feet, you will have that option, and I've already laid it out for you. I'm gonna show you how to do that in this video. And we're gonna walk step by step through this entire bag. I'm gonna show you how to assemble the outside, give you some tips for top stitching, show you how to add your zippered pocket, show you how to add the snap together grommets, which are actually really simple. Don't be scared. I'll show you how to use the cording here with the little caps. Those are easy to put on, and how to make this little tab. And we're just gonna work step by step through this entire bag. So let's go ahead and take a look at our materials and get started. So for the first two samples that I showed you for this bucket bag, I used cork for the outside for the main piece as well as the accent and handle. For this one, I decided to do it all out of canvas. So this is a lighter cotton canvas. It's one of the Rifle Paper Company canvases. I really like this one. And because it has such a pretty print, I didn't want to break that up at all for the handle and the accent, so I used the same fabric for the entire bag. I also chose to skip the purse feet on this one, and I did not add the short handle. I just made the adjustable handle. And I even skipped the little drawstring tab right here. I just wanted to make this one a little bit more simple. So for the sample I'm going to be making in today's video, I went ahead and chose a waxed canvas for my outside fabric. So as per the cutting instructions on page 1, I've already gone through and cut all of my pieces. So A through F are going to be cut from your main. And that is going to be either cork, or it could be the canvas like I used here. It can be a quilter's cotton, or it could be a wax canvas. Because I'm using wax canvas, I've chosen not to interface. You can interface if you would like to, but I kind of like the look of it when it's not interfaced. If you're using cork, you will also skip the interfacing. If you are using a cotton, like a canvas like I did here, or a quilter's cotton, you will go ahead and cut interfacing as well. That's also included in your instructions. Down on the bottom of page 1, it's going to tell you what you're going to need for which piece. So I've gone ahead and I've cut everything out and tagged it with some Post-its. I also went ahead and cut out my templates. You'll see a note on the page that there are 2 templates that you'll need to cut out. And I've already gone ahead and cut those and gotten them put together. Template 2 does need to be taped together, and I'll show you how to do that. For template 1, I just cut that out, and that's gonna be for my E piece. I got that all trimmed, and so this is my outside pieces A through F. I've also chosen a cork that I'm going to use for pieces G and H and my little drawstring tab. So I've cut that out, and I have my pieces marked on the back in a chalk pencil since nobody's going to see those. So I have my H piece, the 2 pieces here, which are for my handle, and I also have my top. This is going to be where my grommets will go. And I've gone ahead and cut out my lining as well and gotten that fused. So I have my pieces here of lining fabric that don't need interfacing, and I have these 2 right here, which I've already interfaced with Decor Bond. I have my bottom piece already cut out with my template, and I am ready to go. So let's take a look also at some of the hardware that you're going to need for this bag. On the website, you will find some complete kits if you would like to purchase a kit that already has fabric and everything already chosen, or if you are doing your own colors, you can go on the website and get yourself a Rue hardware kit. That's going to include your swivel hooks, your D-rings, your slide set, and all of your grommets. And it also comes with your little cord caps. So this is a complete kit for you. I've chosen the gunmetal for this one. This is going to go on my cork, which is black, and I thought that would look really nice and keep it kind of simple. For this one, I'm also going to be adding purse feet, so I grabbed a pack of those. This is a pack of 8. I'm only going to need 4 for this project, so I can get 2 bags out of this pack. And I grabbed a handmade tag because I do want to add that to this bag as well. I try to always do that. Sometimes I forget, but I try to add that whenever I remember. And I did make a note in the pattern so that you can do that as well, just as a friendly reminder that if you want to add one, now would be a good time. So I'll tell you what step that is on. I've also grabbed some of my tools here. I have some pins, which I'll need for my zippered pocket. I, of course, have my sharp scissors. Those I'm going to need for trimming and also for cutting out the holes for my grommets. I have my fusible tape here for my zippered pocket. Clips, of course. Whenever you're working with wax canvas or with cork, clips are going to be easier than pins. And so I always have a bowl of those around. And then all of my regular supplies, my thread, my rotary cutter, my ruler, and all of my basic sewing supplies. So for step 1 of my pattern, that is going to be mostly for my cotton fabrics. That is not going to be for wax canvas or for cork because step 1 is fusing and a little bit of handle prep. So the pieces that needed to get interfacing for me were just these 2 right here. This is my I piece and this is my J piece. I marked those on the back. I've already gone ahead and interfaced those. My A through F pieces are wax canvas. Those do not need interfacing, and neither do these pieces right here. The one thing that I will have to do, and I'm going to get to that in step 2, is I will have to sew these handles together first before I can do my top stitching. If you're using cotton fabric, like I did here on this sample, the cotton canvas, before I am able to do any stitching or anything on this handle, I do need to sew my pieces together, make a nice long strip, and then I'm going to put my interfacing on top of that. It is noted in the pattern, but one of the tips that I like to give people is that when you are sewing these strips together, these are 4 inches wide, so I'm gonna be sewing the 2 4-inch ends. I leave my my selvage on. I don't care about the selvage. I cut that off at the end. That's just something that I do. But I go ahead and I sew those together and I get it all pressed. So press this seam open. Then I'll do any trimming that I need to, and then I will fuse my interfacing on. When you're fusing your interfacing onto this long handle, you're going to fuse your first strip, leaving it short on one end. Go ahead and take your second strip and overlap it just a little bit. Keep fusing, trim it if you need to, and leave it short on the opposite end as well. You're going to want to short that because of how you fold these pieces right here. You don't want to have too much bulk because this is going to get folded twice. You can see that that's a little bit thick right there. The canvas itself is a little bit thicker than cotton, but if I had interfacing all the way to the end here, it would get really hard to turn that and to get my sewing machine to stitch through that. I am not using cotton for my bag today, so I'm not going to demo that step. But if you go to my YouTube channel, which you're already on, and you check out my adjustable handle video, I talk a little bit more about how I do that. But basically, you're just shorting your interfacing to make sure that you have looser ends and a little bit less thickness on each end for your hardware. And you are also going to make sure that you don't butt your interfacing. That's going to cause a permanent crease. You want to slightly overlap. About 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch is all that you need, and press your seam open. So once I have that done, now I'm ready to move on to step 2, which is going to be my handles and tabs. So I'm just going to move these pieces out of my way. And I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch these two together. So if this was fabric, I would be doing the same thing and then interfacing. Since this is cork and I'm skipping the interfacing, I'm just going to take this over to my machine. I'm going to put my two pieces together and sew them right across here with 1/4 of an inch seam. And then what I'm going to do is split my seam. Sometimes I'll press it open, but what I've been doing lately is cutting it in the middle and splitting the seam, and it lays nice and flat for me, and I think it's a little bit more durable. So that's what I'm gonna do on this piece. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch it and bring it back over, and then I'll show you how to prepare it for top stitch. So for step 2, we're going to be working on our H handle, which is the long adjustable, the optional M handle, which I am not gonna do today. And you're also going to be working on your F pieces, which are your side tabs. So I'll show you those in just a minute. I want to show you what I did here on my cork. Because I am using cork, I don't have any interfacing. And what I'm going to do, or what I've already done, is I've stitched my two pieces together right down the middle on the short ends, and I stitched that with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Then I went ahead and I cut my seam. I trimmed it right in the middle, as close to but not through the stitching that I did. And I pressed them in opposite directions. And what this is going to do is eliminate some bulk when I fold this. So if this were fabric, I would be folding it 4 times. So that's why I like to press that seam open. But for cork, I'm only going to be folding it in half. So because I'm doing that, I like to reduce the bulk. And you can see there, by splitting the seam, it's nice and flat here. If I had left the seam going in the same direction, I would have a bump in the middle. And what that can do, not only can it make it harder on your sewing machine, but it can also be more difficult for the slide that will get added on here to be able to move smoothly. So if this was fabric, or if I wanted to fold this differently, I would have pressed this seam open. There is an option if you don't like to fold your cork like this, and have a raw edge on one side and a folded edge on the other side, you can press this open, mark a line down the center, and you can fold both of your edges inward like that. That would make the seam just be on one side, which would be the back. I prefer to do it the easier way and the quicker way and just fold it in half. I don't mind having that edge right there. This is a finished M handle, and you can see there's my raw edge and there's my folded edge. If this is not for you, you do have an option to not do it this way. What I can also do, which I haven't done yet, is I could add some fabric fusion to seal my edge, or I could use some edge coat. There's a lot of different options, and when it comes to bag making, you have to decide what you want to do and what's going to make it look the way that you want it to. Most of my bags are just samples. I don't ever carry them, so I don't do any special finishing. If I were going to use this or give it away as a gift, I would definitely seal my edges just to make them look nicer and to make them more durable. So my cork right here is ready to go. All I have to do is fold it and top stitch it. I like to hold it with my fingers when I take it to the machine, and it's just easier for me to do it that way. If you would prefer to use some clips, you can absolutely do that and just clip that edge right there, and you can just clip all the way down. I find that the clips actually get in my way, and I'm much better at just kind of holding it and doing a little bit at a time. So when I'm ready to sew, I am going to stitch from this edge as well as this edge. I like it to look balanced, and I know that a lot of bag makers and designers only do it on the side that's needed, on this side. That again is totally up to you. I find that it looks better to me and more balanced when I do both sides. So whatever I do on the right, I'll do on the left. And I'm gonna do 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch. I did that here on this M strap. You can see I have my stitching here as well as right here. I like the double stitch. Speaking of the M strap, I did say that I am skipping it for this bag. This is one that I had made for one of the earlier samples. You can see I sewed my pieces together. I did my split seam and I did my top stitching. It's just a shorter handle than the one I'm going to be making, and it gets the swivel hooks added to each end. Very simple to do, and I'll show you how to add those. So if you're doing the optional M handle, you can go ahead and prep that as well. The other piece that I'm going to prep is going to be my F, and I'll show you how to do that since I'm using wax canvas. It's a little bit different, but this is how you would fold your fabric. Before I show you that, I just want to show you why I have these 2 feet here. These are going to be the feet that I use for my handle. This is my G foot, which is a blind hem foot. I'm going to move my needle position as far left as it will go. And when I'm ready to do my top stitching, I'm just going to slide that right along this edge to get my 1/8 of an inch. And I do that on both sides. This is just my regular 1/4 of an inch foot. I'll do the same thing and I'll have my 1/4 of an inch stitch. So that's how I get my double line. So for my F pieces right here, these are going to be for the side tabs of the bag. So these are not technically handles, but they're going to be folded and top stitched just like handles would be. So because these are fabric and not cork, and I don't want the raw edges showing, what I would do if this was interfaced fabric is I would have my inner facing towards me, and I would take this to the ironing board and fold it just like this. But here's the great thing about wax canvas. I don't need an iron. I can just use my fingers just like that. So if this was canvas, I would take my iron that centered crease right there, open this up, fold this edge in, and iron that. For the wax canvas, my fingers act as the iron, so I'm just gonna press that there, turn this over, do the same thing here, like that, and then fold this one more time, just like so, and smooth that out. Again, if this is opening and I need to add some clips, I can do so, but I'm totally fine with it just like this. And because this is wax canvas, I do like to have that crinkly look. So I'm gonna go ahead and just give that some crinkles. It gives it that old distressed leather look. You can do it before folding or after, doesn't matter. This one I'll do before. This is the best part about wax canvas, is that wrinkles are good. So I have that all wrinkled and I can go ahead and press. So if you're doing anything out of cotton, you would be pressing the same way. You would just need to make sure that your inner facing was towards the inside. That way when it's all done, the inner facing is hidden, and you would be using an iron to do all of your creases. But lucky me, I chose wax canvas and it makes it so much easier. So I'll get these folded. I like to get all of my handles prepped. That way I can just go over to the sewing machine, get my feet set up, get my thread set up, and go ahead and do my top stitching. So the big decision that I need to make is, I have a black handle and I have a yellow handle. Do I want to use 2 different colors of thread, or do I want to use the same color? And I think I'm gonna go ahead and mix it up. I have a beige color with me, I'll probably use for this, and I'll go ahead and use the black for this. It's perfectly fine if you want to use a contrasting color. However, if you use a contrasting thread, make sure that your stitching is really straight, otherwise that could really bug you. So I'm gonna switch them out. I will be using the same feet for both, but I'm just gonna switch my thread colors, and I'm gonna head over to the machine and get these ready so I can add my hardware. All of my top stitching is complete for my handles. I have my H long adjustable handle. That is the black one right here in cork. I have that all top stitched, and I used a black thread so that it would blend in. I've also gone ahead and done my F tabs. Since these are the marigold color wax canvas, I used a beige on those. I'm gonna use that same thread for my piecing and my top stitching for the outside of the bag, which is also out of the yellow. I've grabbed all of my hardware here for my handles, and since I am not adding the M optional handle, I don't have the extra swivel hooks, and I don't have this piece. If you are adding that, you will have this M handle all top stitched as well. So for this one, you just have swivel hooks on each end, and I'll show you how to do those when I get to this handle. It's the same principle. So what I'm gonna do is start with my F tabs. In your pattern, it's going to give you the measurement of how long these need to be. And just remember, your measurement is going to go from the base to where it is folded on the D-ring. It does not include the D-ring. So I'm gonna fold this over just like this and check my measurement real quick here. And it's going to be, again, measured from here to here. It does not include that part of the D-ring. You don't want these to be too tall, otherwise this will get in your way for finishing your bag. So after I have one of these clipped and in place, I'm gonna do the other one, and I'm just gonna line this up and make sure that they're both the same, just like so, makes it even easier. So regardless of whether I am using cork or any kind of fabric for these, I'm gonna do them the same way. So this little raw edge right here is actually going to be the backside when it's sewn onto a bag, so it does not matter. So whether this is cork or cotton or wax canvas, you'll prep them the same. These are ready to take to the sewing machine, so I'm just gonna set those aside, and I'm gonna go ahead and move on to this part right here. So because this is cork, the only difference is that I'm going to be folding my edge one time instead of twice, and I'll show you what that means. So I'm gonna grab one of my ends here. Remember, if this was fabric, this end down here, actually both of your ends, would be a little bit loose and it wouldn't have any interfacing on it. Got some loose threads, there we go. So you would have no interfacing down here on the end of your cotton fabric. Since I use cork, I don't have any interfacing. And I'm gonna start with my slide, and what I'm gonna do is I kind of just hold that between my fingers to hold this in the center. I'm going to bring this up and over that bar, just like so, and I bring it down maybe about an inch or so. If you have cotton, you'll feel this kind of hit the top of the interfacing. You'll know that it's time to stop. For cork, like I said, it's about an inch, inch and a quarter. So if this was cotton, this is what I would do. I would fold my end once like this to hide the raw edges and twice to bring that down to here. But because cork doesn't fray and to eliminate some bulk, I don't need to do that. So I'm just gonna bring this down just like so. And actually I'm gonna slide this a little bit closer, just like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab a clip and put my clip right here. So I'm gonna take this to the machine and I'm gonna stitch back and forth a few times right here on that bottom edge. If you want to, you can add a second line right here closer to the bar. It doesn't matter. If this has a little bit of wiggle room, it's fine. So I'm gonna stitch this and I'm gonna stitch these two, and then I'll come back and add my swivel hooks and I'll show you how you would complete this optional strap if you have it. I have my D-rings stitched in place on my F pieces. Something to note on these, the stitching that I'm doing is not super important. It's actually just kind of a temporary hold until I get this to the bag. I will be stitching on top of this when I add this to my bag sides. So if I only do the stitching once across, I didn't even back stitch on that, it's totally fine. This will give me a guide for later for when I am stitching over this. If you don't want to stitch right now, you could just use clips, but I find, and when we get to this step, it'll probably make more sense, that in stitching it, I don't have to worry about these coming off or anything moving or my size being affected. So these are all ready to go. I'm gonna set them aside. I don't have to do anything else to those right now. And for my long adjustable handle, I went ahead and I stitched my slide in place. So I did stitch down here on the edge and I did stitch about a ½ inch closer. I still have some wiggle room here. This was not completely necessary, but I did it anyway. Just something that I wanted to do. So what I'm gonna do now is I try to make sure that I am not twisted at all. You don't want your handle to twist because it will be sewn in and it will be kind of a pain to take it out. So I make sure my handle is not twisted. I'm gonna take one of these swivels and I'm just gonna slide it on and it's gonna stay loose. I am not sewing that or doing anything with that. I noticed that I have some threads here, so let me just trim those. I missed a few in my initial trimming. There we go. So now that that's on and everything is nice and straight, now I'm going to take this end right here and I'm going to bring that, sorry, this thread's driving me crazy. There we go. I'm gonna bring this end up and over that center. So my stitched part is facing inward right here. I'm taking my strap and again going up and over where I've already sewn and bringing that down. And now I have an adjustable strap. You can see that it's already moving, moves really easily. And down on this end right here is where I'm going to add my second swivel hook. So I'm just gonna take this and fold it once and sew that in place. Again, if this was fabric, I would be folding once to hide the raw edge, twice to bring it here. But for this case, since it's cork, I just have to fold it the one time. I'm going to stitch across here a few times to secure that. And that is the same way that you would add your swivel hooks to your M piece if you were doing this. So this is that short adjustable or non-adjustable handle, and I just folded my ends over each of my swivel hooks, sewed it in place. That was it. Didn't have to worry about much. You don't have to worry about it twisting because you don't go through a slide. You don't really have to do too much for this, and it's just a nice little optional handle. So now that I have this all set, I'm going to take this to the machine, stitch that in place, and then I will set this aside. I don't need this again for my bag. This is going to be added on the end when everything is complete. For step 4, I'm going to make my outside pocket. I have my D piece, which is out of my main outside fabric, and I have a piece of L, which is from my lining fabric. This does not have any interfacing. Because I'm using wax canvas, this doesn't either. If this was cork, it would also not have interfacing. And if you are using cotton, this piece would be interfaced. So I'm gonna take these and put them right sides together. And I don't really have a right or a wrong side for the wax canvas, so I'm just gonna turn it right over here. And I'm gonna take this to my machine and sew right across this top edge. This is one of my shorter edges. So if you have a directional piece, remember that this would be your top. So if you have trees or animals or something that has a direction to it or a pattern, you wanna make sure that this is the top and this is the bottom. I'm gonna take this to the machine and I'm gonna sew right across here 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to press it and get it ready for top stitching. I placed my D and L pieces right sides together. I stitched 1/4 inch across the top edge, turned it, gave it a quick press. Because I'm using wax canvas, I did not press it with an iron. I just finger pressed right along the top here. So I have my back piece kind of tucked down. I went ahead and top stitched 1/4 inch across here. And then I also stitched my sides within the seam allowance. That just keeps everything from shifting. So when I add this on to the outside of the bag, I'm not gonna have to worry about anything moving. So now I'm ready to go on to step 5. For step 5, I'm going to take my pocket that I just finished and I'm going to add that onto my A piece, which is the outside front. I'm gonna go ahead and take off my little sticky here. So this should be facing me the right side. So if this was a pattern or a piece of regular fabric that had a wrong and a right side, it should be facing towards me. One thing I'm gonna do quickly before I sew is do my creasing. That's my favorite part. So after I crinkle that, I'm just gonna smooth it out. So I'm gonna call this the right side. So the right side is facing up towards me. The right side of my pocket is also the wax canvas, so that is also facing up towards me. I'm gonna align the bottom and the edges. If I want, I can add some clips. A lot of times I don't for smaller pieces like this, but I'll go ahead and do that just so you can see. I'm gonna take this over to the sewing machine and I'm gonna stitch basically where I basted along these edges, just the side, the bottom, and the other side. This is obviously gonna stay open so that it works as a pocket. You would be surprised how many people forget and stitch across there because you just kind of get into the rhythm. So you're just gonna do sides and bottom. Once I have that stitched, I'm also gonna take my B pieces and I'm going to sew those on. So I'm gonna grab a couple more clips here just to show you how this looks. Do my crinkling. It feels kind of wrong to look at fabric like this and have it wadded up in a ball as if it was a piece of paper I was throwing out, but that's what you want to do with your wax canvas. So these are my B pieces. These are also going to be on either side. These are going to be placed right side down. So let's say that I've already stitched this in place. I'm going to do all of my sewing at once, so that's why I want to show you this step all together. Let's say that I've already stitched this in place and that D pocket is not moving. I'm going to take my B's and I'm gonna put this one right side down on the right and this one right side down on the left. I'm gonna sew 1/4 inch from the top to bottom on both of those, open that up, press it if needed, and I'm gonna top stitch. All of the top stitching on these pieces are going to be going away from the center. So if this is the center, I'm gonna press away and top stitch on the B, press away and top stitch on the B. I'm gonna go ahead and get this all sewn and top stitch and bring it back over, and we'll move on to step 6. I have all of my front and side pieces sewn together. So again, I have my pocket here, which I put on my A piece. I just basted it around the edges. You might be wondering why I basted it and then also put it on the A piece and stitched again. And the reason is, depending on what fabric you're using or what material, sometimes this back piece right here can shift a little bit. I just like to add a little bit of extra stitching because it makes me feel more confident that things are not going to move on me. If you want to stitch, skip that little bit of stitching, it's fine. But I went ahead and I just basted right along the edge here within my seam allowance. I took my B pieces, I put them right side down, stitched 1/4 inch, and I made sure to back stitch, and then I pressed them both out and away. So I'm pressing away from the center, and then I am top stitching 1/8 inch. I've chosen to just do the single 1/8 inch stitch for a couple reasons. By doing less than 1/4, it's catching this seam and keeping it flatter. And also when we get a couple steps further and add our back piece, there's going to be a point when this is a tube, and trying to top stitch just one seam is going to be a little bit more difficult and awkward than the other ones. If I had done some extra, nice stitching here, some double seam stitching, it would have looked really pretty, but it would have been one extra challenge for me later. And you'll see what I mean when we get to that step. So I just like to do this single stitch right here, 1/8 inch. I did not take this to the ironing board because with wax canvas, I don't need to. If I had cork or cotton, I would have gone over and pressed that, but I'm still pressing away from the center. So now that I have that done, I'm ready to move on to step 6, which is going to be adding my side tabs right here. So in my pattern, it's going to tell me to place these on each side on my B pieces, and I'm going to be placing them equally over. I'm going to use my ruler. It's going to be 3/4 inch. So what I'm going to do here is just use my ruler to measure and place that. I'm not clipping this just yet. I'm going to show you a couple of options on how to mark this and keep it in place. So there's that one right there. So they're both ready to go, ready to take to the sewing machine. So when I take this to the sewing machine, I can sew the bottom if I want to. It's not a big deal if you don't. Sometimes it helps for when you're starting and stopping so you don't get little loose threads. I'm going to follow my 1/8 inch seam, so I'm going to use that blind hem foot again. I'm going to stitch all the way up. I'm going to come to this spot right here where I stitched, and I'm going to reinforce a few times back and forth. That's going to be a stress point, so I really want to stitch a few times to secure it, and then follow that 1/8 inch down to the bottom. Do the same on this side. So how do you keep these from shifting when you get to the sewing machine? There's a few ways. If you're using cotton, obviously you can just grab some pins and you can pin right through your layers. Because I'm using wax canvas and for some of the samples I use cork, that's not always an option. It's not the best option to pick. So what I do with those is I clip down here, just add one to the bottom of each, and then I also clip up at the top right onto the D-ring. That usually is good enough, But if I'm afraid that these are gonna shift at all and I wanna keep them nice and straight, what I can do is take a pen or a pencil, something light, and I can make just some little marks right up the side. You can do it inside or outside, it doesn't matter. And that can be something for you to line them up. Since I have the wax canvas here, I'm just gonna kind of crease it just a little bit right here. And now I have this line that I can see that's gonna keep that straight. If I wanna add a pin, one pin is not gonna hurt it on the wax canvas. I just try not to do that if I don't need it. And I feel like I'm okay. I feel like it's not shifting or anything. So you definitely have some options. Pin, clip, or mark. I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine, and again, I'm gonna stitch from the bottom up here, reinforce a few times, come back down, do the same thing on this side. I have my front and my sides all stitched together, and I have my C piece so I can finish up the outside of the bag. So I have my side tabs already sewn in place. My D-rings are facing up towards the top, just like my pocket here. So this is gonna be the bottom edge. I have a little bit of trimming to do and a couple of loose threads, but I'll take care of those afterwards. So what you're gonna do with this C piece, this is the back outside of the bag. You're going to sew this on the same way that you added your B pieces to the front. You're going to place this right sides together, sew a 1/4 inch seam, press away from the B, and you're gonna top stitch. Then you're going to do the same thing on this side, and that's how this becomes a tube. So after I have this sewn, I'm gonna pull this over to here. This is already sewn. I'll have this pulled over to here, sew, and then what I'm going to need to do is top stitch. That one row is just going to be the awkward side, just because you are gonna be top stitching through a tube. I'll show you on the machine how I kind of roll it as I go. It does not matter what side you start on, it makes no difference. So if I sew it here first or here, it doesn't make a difference. I'm gonna wrinkle this up, add this on, and I'm good to go. So your piece, remember, is wider than it is tall. So if you accidentally do this and think, oh no, it's not gonna fit, just turn it this way. So I'm gonna take this to the machine, sew this on, press it with my fingers, top stitch, and then do the same on the opposite side, creating a tube. The outside top part of my bag is all finished. I'm leaving it wrong side out because that's what I'm going to need for the next step. I don't need to turn this right side out yet. I still have to add the bottom piece. So I went ahead and I sewed my back piece, which is the C, onto the sides. As you can see, one side is always a little bit easier because it's still flat. And then when you do the second side, the stitching is not the hard part. Top stitching just takes a little bit of finagling. It's not a big deal if you just kind of take your time. You just have to do one row of top stitching when it's like a tube. So all I did is when I put this through my machine is I just kind of got my foot lined up at the top here and just slowly kept working and pulling this down. It's a little bit awkward on your hands, but it's totally doable. And that's what you're gonna have to do when you have any kind of round bag like this. Using cork or something a little bit stiffer, if you had a vinyl or a leather, it's going to add a little bit of an extra challenge because it's a little harder to maneuver, but doing wax canvas or cotton, it was not too difficult. So this is all set for right now. I do need to add my outside bottom, but I want to do my purse feet first. So I've already gone ahead and I've trimmed my E-piece with my template, and I went ahead and cut the holes in my template for the purse feet. So what I'm gonna do is take this piece right here and I'm going to place my template on top. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my feet, my washers right here, and place one in each of the holes, just like that. Not perfect, but it's a great way to get your placement. And I'm just gonna take my pen and mark the 2 little slits because that's where I'm going to need to cut. And like that. And like that. So I have those all marked, so I'm just going to slide that over. And I'm going to take my seam ripper. I can use either small scissors or I can use my seam ripper, either or, and I'm just going to cut these little slits out. So what I like to do is put my seam ripper down and then pull it back until it pokes right out of the top part, and then just like that. Or I can just use my scissors and make a little cut, either or. So I'm just going to do the rest of these. I like doing it with the seam ripper this way because then I'm not afraid that I'm going to push it too far and make a bigger tear that I can't hide. You'll notice that I wasn't very fussy about which direction the washers went in because it does not matter. You're not going to see the washers when this is finished, so it's not going to make any difference. Okay, so I'm going to take my feet now, just like that, and I'm going to open up the feet and just kind of use my seam ripper to get in there and push those prongs apart because it's hard to get your fingers in there sometimes. There we go. And just kind of open those prongs up. I'll do that with these as well. If I had any fingernails, it might be easier, but I don't. So it's just a little bit quicker if I use the end of my seam ripper and just kind of pull that apart. So what I'm going to do, if this is the right side, this is the side that's going to face out, I'm going to put my foot through that side. So that is going to be the back right here. So this is either the back of your fabric or your inner facing. I'm going to take my washer, and these always seem like they don't want to fit. It seems like the prongs are facing too far out for the slits in the washer, but if you can just get that on there and push it down nice and tight, when you pull those prongs outward and flatten them like that, it sits really nicely. And I'll just put it on my table and kind of push that down as well. And do the same thing over here. And the feet are completely optional, but I know that sometimes when you want to add purse feet, you're not really sure where to add them and how to space them out. And I wanted to add that onto the template because I think this is a great bag to add purse feet on. So I'll smush those, and I'm not doing the best job because I like to put it on the table and really give it a good push. Make sure that everything is nice and flat. Because these feet are not weight bearing of any kind, they're not a piece of hardware like a D-ring or a swivel hook or even a twist lock, I'm not adding any kind of extra padding here. There's no stitching. I'm just putting them through. They're more decorative than anything else, and they're on the bottom of the bag, so I'm not super concerned. And I'm just going to push those down, push that down, and I'm good to go. I like to do this before I get started because I find it easier to work on a flat piece than to put it onto the bag and try to do it that way. So now that I have that ready to go, I'm going to add the bottom to the top part right here. So the first thing I need to do is I have to find my center. I have to find my center going this way and my center going this way. So with the bottom, what I do is I just fold this in half, and you can mark this with a pen, or what I've been doing lately is using my scissors, and I just make a really tiny little V cut like that. So it's not super big, but I can see where that center is. Since it's wax canvas, I could also just crease it with my fingers. That would work as well. Whatever you need to do that's not going to be seen later, You can mark however you like. So if I was using cork, I would either do this little snip or I would just use a pen. If I had cotton, I could use pins. So there's that right there. So now my bottom is all set. I need to do the same thing to my bag, to the top. So my hardware is up here. So this is the top. I need to make my markings down here. And the first thing that I like to do is the front and back, because I can take my pocket and fold that together and see where the front is. And do the same thing over here. There's the back. And then I'm gonna put those marks together and do the sides. And the sides are not necessarily the center of these tabs. So don't assume that, because then your markings will be off. And this is kind of thick right here, so I might just add a little pen mark just to be safe, just to make sure I can see it, because I am cutting through part of the bottom of the tab. So I'm going to do a double right there. So now that my centers are marked, I'm going to take this, and before I go on to the next step and show you how to add the bottom onto your bag, I just want to make one note because I forgot to mention it. In the next step, your shorter parts of your oval go on the sides and the wider parts are for the front and back, so that your bag is wider this way and narrower on the sides. It's going to look wrong in the next step because I did pin it and clip it in place incorrectly. I went back and fixed it, so ignore that fact in the next step of this video. When you see it on the following step, I have already fixed it. I will be humble and let you know that yes, I did make a mistake. Put my feet facing down because I want this right sides together. And I'm just gonna start lining up the side marks. Grab my clips. Line this side up over here. Whenever you're doing something with an oval or a circle, it always looks kind of weird and it feels like it's not going to go together smoothly. But when you get this to the machine, that's when you're going to use your hands or even a stiletto if it helps to smooth things out and, you know, straighten them. So once I have those lined up, sometimes this just doesn't look like it wants to go together. It will when you're sewing it. You just kind of have to work that in. And if it feels like one of your pieces is too big, it could just be because it's not laying flat for this part right here. Sometimes it feels like they don't fit, but it always seems to go together. If you get any little puckers or any little tiny pleats, I wouldn't stress about it. On a round bag like this, they actually hide very well. And if it's a really small little pucker or pleat, you're not gonna notice it anyway. Okay, so I'm all pinned together, clipped together, I'm ready to go. I'm gonna take this to the machine, and what I have found gives me a really smooth, rounded bottom is if I stitch twice. My first stitching I do is just a basting stitch, 1/8 of an inch. Doing it nice and close to the edge, it gets the clips out of the way, and it makes it nice and smooth when I do my 1/4 of an inch. Because I've already gone ahead and stitched that in place, I can come back in and do my second sewing, and I find that especially around these tighter curves, it comes out a lot better. I've been doing that recently and really liking the results. And what I get asked a lot is when you're sewing something like this, should you be sewing it with the bottom facing you, or should you be sewing it with the bottom facing down? I find that I like it better with the bottom facing down. I like the top of the bag kind of standing up and sewing it this way. Try it both ways and see what works for you, but that tends to work better for me than this. It's totally up to you. It's not really a wrong or a right thing. So I'm gonna take this to my machine, baste it 1/8 of an inch, and then sew it 1/4 of an inch, and then I can turn it right side out. So I've gone ahead and sewn the bottom onto the top part of my bag. I basted 1/8 of an inch first and then sewed 1/4 of an inch seam. I just find that that gives me such a better curve. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this right side out. I wanna check all of my seams, make sure that they look good. Got a little thread here. Doesn't that just bug you when one little thread wants to poke out of your seam? Makes me batty. All right, so I'm just gonna work around with my fingers and push that out. I can definitely take this to the ironing board if I want to, depending on what your fabric is, if you wanna give this a press. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I don't, because I know that I'm going to be turning this again in a later step. So if I press now, I'm just gonna have to press again anyway. If you find that there's any spots that you feel really need attention, you can go ahead and do that. So I've gone ahead and gotten this all ready to go. The last thing I'm going to do before I work on my inside is add a handmade tag. As the pattern indicates, now is a great time to do that. I like to finish the outside of my bag so I can see where I want to place it. Do I want to put it up at the top in the center? Do I want it here? You know, where do I want to put that? So I think I'm going to put it off to the side here. If I put it on my pocket itself, because the pocket is complete, I'm gonna see the washer on the back, and that might be rough on my hand. I would rather have it on the inside of the bag so that when the lining is in, it's not showing at all. So I'm gonna take my washer, and I just like to double check here, and it looks like I need to mark 1 in from each side. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this. If you wanna use a ruler and be more precise than I am, by all means, go ahead. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball the placement. Grab my pen here, and I'm just gonna mark those 2 little spots. Again, take my seam ripper and put my seam ripper in, bring it back out, and just like that. And again, because the handmade tag is not weight bearing at all, I don't feel the need to put anything extra behind it. I can add a little bit of glue onto it if I want to, but it's really just for decoration. So I'm gonna put that through, make sure it looks straight, which it does. I really like how the gunmetal is looking on the marigold wax canvas. I'm gonna take my washer, and the purse feet, I fold my prongs outward. Every other piece of hardware, I fold them inward. I really can't explain why, but it just makes sense to me. So I'm just gonna fold that in and just look at that. So that's all done. So the outside of my bag for now is finished. I'm gonna set this aside and I'm going to start working on the inside. Step 9 is adding the zippered pocket to the lining piece. I am going to go through the steps with you here, but I do also have a completely separate video on the YouTube channel, which is all about zippered pockets and recessed zipper closures. If you haven't checked that out, you can go ahead and watch that. It's going to give you even more information, but I am going to walk you through the pattern on how to install this. So this is my K piece. This is the pocket, does not have any interfacing, and this is my lining piece I. So I'm going to turn this over. I have my interfacing side up, and I'm going to make some marks. So if you have a directional fabric, which I do not, make sure that this is the top edge, okay? The banana print that I have goes in all different directions, so it does not have a top or a bottom. But if you have a directional fabric, this should be your top. And according to the pattern, my first line is going to be 2.5 inches down. So I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler. Way I keep everything nice and straight, and I'm gonna mark 2.5 inches down. I'm just using a pen here, and I'm gonna make a line across here. It is way bigger than it needs to be, but that's okay. I'm gonna clean this up, and no one's gonna see the backside on the interfacing, so I'm not really concerned. I'm gonna pull the ruler towards me, so I'm working down towards the bottom of the pocket. I'm moving it 1/4 inch and drawing another line, and 1/4 inch and drawing one more line. So I have 3 horizontal lines. I always do those first and then go back in and do my vertical lines. So now that I have those there, I'm gonna find the center of my lining piece, and I just fold. I'm just gonna make a little tiny mark, and I'm going to use that to measure out an 8-inch box. So these lines, way too big, but that's okay. I'm going to use my ruler here, and I'm gonna mark out 4 inches to the right and 4 inches to the left. So I have a centered box that is now 8 inches wide. Now I'm going to also make some little marks right here. And these are just little triangles that face in towards each other. Those have nothing to do with the stitching. It's going to be for the cutting part, and it's going to tell me where to stop cutting. So now that I have this ready, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine. And I'm going to take this pocket right here, get this pinned and ready to go, and I'll stitch it. So I'm going to take my K pocket and I'm placing it right side up. This is taller than it is wide, so the pocket should look like this. I'm now going to take this piece right here and put that down. And what I want is for this to be centered as best as I can this way. If this is over too far and the box is off the pocket, that's not going to work. We need to make sure we have enough seam allowance. And I promise that will make sense when we get to completing it. And I want the pocket up here on the top to stick up about 3 inches or so. That is going to be important for a finishing step. If you are ever making another pocket in one of my other patterns, I normally tell you that this doesn't matter, the up and down. In a regular bag, you could be up here, but that could add some issues when we get to the finishing steps. So I'm going to make sure I have at least 3 inches up here. I'm not measuring it, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. And I'm making sure that this is fairly centered here. You can measure if you want to. I'm gonna grab my pins and I'm just gonna pin the corners because I don't want this pocket piece to flip under when I'm sewing. If that happens, it's going to get caught and I have to get out my seam ripper and unsew. And I really don't want to unsew anymore. So I'm just gonna pin the bottom and the top. I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch around the outside of this box. Don't worry about the lines that I drew that were too long. Don't worry about the center or the triangles. Just stitch on the outside of this box right here, and then we're gonna get ready to cut the center. So leave your pins in when you're done sewing. I took this to the sewing machine and I stitched all the way around the box here. I did reinforce a little bit in the corners because I was off a little bit. I tried to keep that as straight as possible. When you're sewing, you want to stay on your lines and keep it as straight as you can to make sure that it looks the best when it's done. Right here, I veered off just a little bit. I don't think it's going to make a difference. It's not my best stitching, but that's okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut from this point to that point of my triangle. I'm going to just take my seam ripper and get this started and just tear a little bit. I'm going through this layer as well as this layer. And now I'm just going to use my scissors. If you would prefer to do this at your cutting mat with a rotary cutter, you can do that as well. It does not matter. So I'm going to cut right to that point. And now what I'm going to do is cut back into the corner. And here is the best tip that I can give you. It's going to seem really minor, but the closer that you get to this stitching without cutting through, the better. And if your stitching is off a little bit, or if your triangle is not perfectly drawn, don't worry about those lines. Worry about getting into there, into your stitching. Because if you are off, even by like a thread, your pocket doesn't want to lay flat, and that can cause you some issues, but it can also just not look as nice. So you can see I'm getting like really, really close. If I come back and I'm like off a little bit, I'm, even a 1/16 of an inch, my pocket's just not gonna lay as flat, and I cut off a little bit of that point by accident, does not matter. You don't want to remove the triangle, you want to use it as a guide. And I'm just, again, gonna get in here. And this corner was not perfect. I tried to straighten it out, so I'm just gonna cut as close as I can. The more square your corners are, the better this will look. So now that I have that all ready to go, I'm gonna take my pins out, but I'm gonna keep them because I want them for my next part. And I'm going to take this pocket and pull it through to the interfacing side. So I'm gonna pull the top and the bottom, and then pull that through. And now it looks like a big old mess, but that's because you are ready to iron. So you're gonna take this to your ironing board and you're going to fold this back like that. You want to make an opening. You want to fold these edges right where you sewed so that you have a really crisp edge and an opening here for your zipper. And you're just gonna work around, and you're gonna work around your corners here. Now, let me show you right here. I'll see if I can like zoom in. My corner, I can tell, has this little pucker right here. Not huge, but it's a little tiny bit of a pucker. I'm gonna grab my scissors, these. I like my little scissors. And I'm gonna just come in here and I'm gonna snip one more tiny little thread, and I can hear it kind of pop. And now when I go in here and I pull that smooth, do you see how that pucker is gone? Just a thread or a little tiny bit can make a huge difference. So I'm gonna take this to the ironing board. I like to work on the back to start to flatten it out, and then I turn it around to the front and I press. And when you're doing your pressing, I have the same fabric for my pocket as well as my lining, so it's not a huge deal, but I like to tuck that pocket all the way down so that all I'm seeing is the lining piece. If for some reason some of this sticks out and you don't get a perfect press and you get that little lip right there, as long as you keep it even, that's all that matters. And here's a really fun thing that you can do as well. If you change this pocket to a different fabric, let's say I picked a pink or just a different color yellow, what happens if you have that little bit of a lip, it ends up looking like piping. This is the inside, so I'm not super concerned about that, but if I was adding it on the outside and I wanted to have that cool look, I could definitely do that. I'm gonna take this over to the ironing board, I'm gonna get this prepped, and then I'll show you how to go ahead and add your zipper. My zippered pocket is all prepped and ready for the zipper. So I went ahead and pulled my pocket piece through to the back, gave it a really good press. I worked on the front as well as the back side. And when I come back here, you'll see that I have some tape. So I've used my 1/4 inch double stick tape. This is a double-sided paper backed tape, so the paper is still on here. And I fused a piece along the 2 longer edges of the zippered opening. I don't really care about these short ends. I have not found that by adding tape, it's helped me, look any better. So I just do the long edges and I line it up as close to the edge as I can. And the purpose of this tape is to replace pins. If you are trying to pin your zipper in place, a lot of times it gets kind of crooked or it will go to one side. I find that by using tape, it's a lot easier and my zippers look a lot better. So I have my zipper all ready to go. This is our zipper by the yard. I already added my pull, and just in case you're using zipper by the yard and want some tips, I'll show you how to add your pull on as well. Let me just move that out of the way. So I'm working on this side of the pull that has a little divider in the middle that has the 2 separate sides. I'm gonna open up my zipper a little bit. I'll get it started a little on one side, pull this over and get it on the other side. Sometimes you'll hear it click, sometimes you'll just kind of feel it click together. And then I put it on a hard surface, put my fingers down and just wiggle and pull until it goes on. And if I am uneven at all, I can open this up and trim that edge. So now that my zipper is ready to go, I'm gonna take it over to my ironing board and I'm going to place the zipper just like this facing up towards me. Working from the back side is going to make it a lot harder and your zipper is not going to be straight. I'm gonna take the paper off of this piece right here. And if your paper doesn't wanna come off or if it's ripping, take it back to the ironing board and just press it a little bit more. Sometimes when it's warm, it comes off easier. So I have my zipper facing up and I'm going to take my pocket. First things first, I'm gonna pin it. Very important. I forgot to pin it when I was done and I left my pins over at the ironing board. So I'm gonna do that first to make sure that nothing moves on me. And now I'm gonna turn this piece over and place it on top of the zipper. Just like this. And if it's a little crooked, I'll put my finger here and just kind of wiggle underneath and straighten that out. And once I like how that looks, I'll go ahead and iron it in place. If you work from the front side, you're going to be happier with the results. If you try to work on the back side and put your zipper in the opening that way, that's when you're going to get a crooked zipper because you can't see how it looks. So I'm gonna fuse this in place. Once I have it fused, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew all the way around the zipper. I want to be about 1/8 to maybe 1/16 of an inch away, so I'm sewing on the fabric nice and close all the way around. This is a wider zipper tape. I could go wider if I wanted to, but if you're using a different style zipper, you don't want to be sewing 1/4 of an inch because you won't catch the zipper. So I'm probably going to be about 1/8 to 1/16 inch away. You can use your zipper foot, or what I like to do is just use my 1/4 inch or my blind hem foot, and I don't worry if the foot is touching the zipper. What I worry about is where my stitching is. So if I'm sitting at my sewing machine, what I do is I start with my foot down a little ways. That way the pull is out of the way. I stitch, come across, stitch, stop about right here, and then I'll go ahead and undo my zipper a little bit and then go ahead and finish. By doing that, I'm not putting too much pressure on that tape and moving it, because the tape is not going to hold it permanently. It's just, again, replacing your pins. So I'm going to fuse this and then take it over to my sewing machine. My zipper is all stitched in place. I'm just taking my pins out now. On the back side here, I'm going to go ahead and trim off my excess zipper. I don't really have too much down here, but I'll trim a little bit just to get that out of the way. And the last thing I need to do is close up the pocket. So on the front here, I have my zipper open, and I'm leaving it open because that's going to help for the finishing steps. If you keep your zipper all the way closed, it's going to make it very hard, and depending on, again, what kind of zipper you're using, sometimes it's hard to get them open at all. So my zipper is open. I'm just gonna leave it that way. Actually, I'm just gonna open it all the way because I might as well. And from here on out, it's gonna stay open. So now I'm gonna turn this piece right here, and I need to close up my pocket. So I'm gonna take my top edge and my bottom edge, pull them together just like that, and you can use pins or clips if you want to. And I'm gonna clip that. Take this to the machine, and I'm going to sew. Now with a regular zippered pocket, depending on the bag that you're doing, you would sew all the way across here. However, with this bag, we're going to turn the entire bag through this zippered pocket when it's done. There's not gonna be a hole left in the lining like we would normally do. So I'm just gonna sew a little bit on either side here. That's it. Leave a nice big opening. Once I have the top and bottom edge sewn together, I'm gonna pull it down because I want my zippered pocket to hang towards the bottom of the bag where it will naturally lay. Once I pull that down, I can close up the sides. Remember not to sew this to your lining piece. This pocket should stay loose. So again, sewing my top and bottom, about an inch or so on each side, leaving a big opening. Once that's sewn, pull it down. I can press the seam down. I don't even usually press, I just use my fingers. Sew the sides closed, don't sew it to the lining. My zippered pocket is all sewn in place. I stitched the top and bottom edge, and I left a big opening here. That's going to be important for finishing my bag. I sewed the sides closed. My pocket is still loose. It's not sewn to the lining. So my zippered pocket is all done. Again, make sure that you leave your zipper open. That's going to be really important for later. So now I'm going to move on to step 10, and I'm going to finish up my lining. First, I'm going to turn this so I can take this edge and pull it right sides together with the other short edge. I'll add a couple of clips here. And I'm gonna take this to my sewing machine and just sew a 1/4 inch seam right from top to bottom. Make sure that you backstitch. My side seam for my lining is all sewn, and I took it to the ironing board and pressed it open. I just like to keep that a little bit flatter. And I've grabbed my lining bottom piece, and I've gone ahead and made my marks just like I did for the outside. So I already folded it, and I just marked it with a pen on the interfacing side, and I did the same thing here. So the seam that's right here is actually going to be towards the front of the bag because the zippered pocket is going to sit towards the back. So because I know that that is the front seam, and I need to use one of the longer edges of the bottom, I'm just going to start there, and I'm going to line up that mark. And even though I'm using cotton here, I can pin it, but I like to clip it. I just find that I'm less likely to hurt myself with pins, so I'd rather just use the clips. So again, I'm gonna do my 2 marks right there, and then come to the sides. do those as well. And I'm going to do the same thing that I had already done with the outside. So I'm just repeating that same step. Once I have that clipped and all of the marks are aligned, I'm going to go ahead and just add a few more clips here. I'm going to sew this the same way. I'm going to do my 1/8 of an inch to baste everything, and then I'm going to go back in with a 1/4 of an inch seam. Since I have an opening in my zippered pocket to use later, I am not going to leave an opening down here. I just find that when it comes to curves, I would rather not leave an opening because it can be a little bit awkward to close later. And since there is a zippered pocket in the bag, why not use that as my turning place? So I have that all clipped. I'm going to take it to my machine, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. I am not going to turn this right side out when I'm done. I'm going to leave it just like this. My lining is all stitched. I did not turn it right side out. I just set that aside for now. The last piece that I need to work on before I can assemble the bag is my drawstring top. So I have my G piece right here, and I'm using cork, so I have the right side of the cork facing me because that's where I'm going to make some marks. I need to do the marks for my grommet placement before I go ahead and do any sewing. So in the back of your pattern, you're going to see this page and you have all of your templates right here. You're going to cut them out and tape them together, and they're going to look like this. So this piece should be the same length as your top piece. Don't worry about the height of this. It makes no difference at all. That is not the important part. So right down here, it's going to tell you bottom front edge of piece G. Make sure that all of those are put together. Here's my center, my right edge, and my left edge. And what I'm gonna do is place this on here. I'm gonna use a couple of clips just to make sure it doesn't shift on me. And it doesn't matter what you mark with because you are going to be cutting in a little bit. You're gonna cut these holes right out. So use whatever marking tool you can see on your fabric or cork. Because I have a dark colored cork, I'm using my white chalk pencil. It might not show up the best on camera, but as long as I can see it, that's what matters. So I've placed this right where it needs to be. Again, this dotted line that's along the top is just letting you know that this is not a full template. It's not going to cover the entire piece right here. It should be the same length, but it does not matter about the height. So I've already used my scissors to cut out each of these holes. And I'm going to go ahead and use my chalk pencil now and mark those. If I were using fabric, I might just use a regular pen. If I had a lighter color cork, I might do that as well. Excuse me. But I'm just going to mark all of these. They do not need to be perfect. This is just more for placement. And I am going to be cutting through both sides when I get to that point. But if these are not perfect, the grommets will hide anything that I didn't do a great job marking. So I'll show you when we get to the cutting part how to make sure that even if your marks are not perfect or your circles are not perfectly cut out on your paper, it will still work. I'm just going back in one more time, make sure that I can see all of those. And I like to do the markings, even though I'm not doing any cutting or installing the grommets yet. I like to do that now while it's still flat. It just works out a lot easier. So I don't know if that's gonna pick up for you on camera, but I can see all 8 of my marks, and that's all that I need to do for now. So now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm also gonna make this into a tube. If the outside and the lining are rounded, I also need my top to be round. So I'm just gonna place this right sides together, just like this. Grab a couple of clips, and I'm going to sew this seam 1/4 of an inch and make sure that I backstitch. I'll bring it back over and show you how to get it ready for top stitching, and then we'll cut the holes. I stitched the seam here, and I went over to the ironing board and pressed that seam open. It's going to help to reduce bulk later. So now that this is wrong side out, I'm going to turn it right side out, and I'm gonna fold these long edges together. And what that's gonna do is get this ready for top stitching. So I'm going to line up this seam here, and I'll use my clips. And just keep working my way around, turning this so that it is right side out, wrong sides together. And my edges, my raw edges are lined up. So this is gonna be the same whether you're using cork or cotton. If you were using cotton, you would be turning the inner facing side on itself, and you'll have the right side of your fabric facing out. And maybe one more clip, there we go. And I'm gonna turn this so that my markings are facing outward. Whenever I top stitch anything, I always like to have the outside facing me. So I'm gonna take this back to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch this folded edge. So this is going to be the very top edge of the bag. You can do, again, a single or a double top stitch, it's up to you. And then what I'm also going to do is stitch along this bottom raw edge about 1/8 of an inch, keep it within the seam allowance. That's gonna keep everything together for my finishing steps, and it's gonna make it go a lot easier, and it will also be easier when I need to cut the holes for my grommets. So I am off to the sewing machine. My G top piece is all prepped. I did a double row of top stitching. I did the 1/4 and the 1/8 just like I did on my handles, just because I like it that way. You can do whatever kind of top stitching you want. Again, this is a great place to be creative. If you want to use some fun threads or some different stitches, it's totally up to you. This is my raw edge right here. This will get sewn into a seam, but I did go ahead and stitch about 1/8 of an inch around the bottom. That's going to help for me when I'm cutting out these holes right here, which is what I'm going to do next. And it's also going to help for the assembly steps. So now that I have this ready, I'm still not going to add my grommets in just because it's extra bulk and it's something extra stiff that can make some of the finishing steps a little bit more difficult. I like to add my grommets at the very end when the bag is all put together. If you want to add them now, it's totally fine. I just like to do them at the very end. That is something that really doesn't matter. As long as your piece is prepped and it's top stitched, it doesn't make a difference. So since I have my marks here and I'm folded together and ready to go, I'm gonna grab my scissors, and you want a nice sharp pair of scissors. If you want to use any kind of special dies or cutting punches, you can absolutely do that. But for me, I'd rather just use a basic tool that I already own. So I'm going to cut out each of these 8 grommet holes. And what I'm going to do is I just kind of fold it and pinch it together so I can get a little slit there and get my scissors in. And when I line up my scissors, let me just get in here. I like to get the scissors right on the outside of my mark. Don't be afraid, you have a little bit of wiggle room, and I know that this can feel really intimidating because you're cutting a hole in cork or in a nice piece of fabric that you just stitched together, and you think, I don't know if I want to do this. But by cutting this hole, now I have room for my grommet, and if this hole is not perfect, I can go back in and adjust it as needed. So as long as I am cutting not way outside, I don't want my scissors to be too far away, but if I'm just placing the edge of the blade right on the mark that I made and cutting, it's going to fit really nicely. This template that I made in the pattern is going to work with our snap together grommets. If you are not using snap together grommets that you purchase from So Many Creations, you're going to need to mark and measure the correct size for your grommets. Ours are just slightly over 1 inch in width, and that's from on the outside. The inside dimension is a little bit over a 1/2 inch. So that is what this template is based on. Again, if you are using somebody else's grommets or grommets that you purchased from another website, you're going to need to check the measurement of yours. You can still use this as a placement guide, but you'll want to make sure that you're not cutting a hole that is too large or too small. Too large is obviously a little bit more tragic than too small. Too small you can always make bigger, but I wouldn't want you to have something incorrect. So they are 1-inch grommets that I am using, and that is what the placement guide is based on. I finished cutting all 8 of the holes for my grommets. Again, I'm gonna wait until the very end when the bag is complete to install those. They're snap together grommets, so they're very easy to put in, and I like to do it when I'm finished. So if you wanna do it right now, totally fine. I'm gonna wait until the end. So I'm now ready to move on to step 12, which is the assembly part. You have 3 main components of your bag. You have your top here, you have your outside, and then you also have your lining piece. We're gonna do the lining piece afterwards. The outside and the top are going to be first. The other piece you have still is your handle, but we are not going to worry about that since it clips on at the end. It does not need to be sewn in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the outside of my bag, which I have turned right side out, and I'm going to place this on top of it, and they should be right sides together. Now, in my case, I don't have a wrong and a right side. It's just a piece of cork, and it looks the same on both sides. If you have a piece of fabric and you like this side better, or it's directional, it doesn't matter. Go ahead and turn it so that the right side is in, so that when you put this together, it's right sides together. Now, this seam right here, I want that in the back. I just like the way that looks better. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just find the center of my back here, and since I'm using wax canvas, I'm just gonna pinch it. I'm gonna place this with the folded finished edge facing down. And I lost my seam, there it is. So I'm going to clip my seam of the G piece to the seam, or the little mark I made on the back, and then I'm just gonna work my way around. If you want to, you can go ahead and make marks and find centers and all that good stuff, but I'm just gonna kind of eyeball this, and I'm going to assume, and hopefully I'm assuming correctly, that all of my measurements to this point are spot on. And if they are not, I'm going to find out. I'm gonna take that D-ring and just push it down. Keep clipping. Moment of truth is coming. Okay, perfect. So here is something that happens a lot. Now my pieces are fine. They're not incorrectly sized, but what happens is you'll get this little ripple right here. Because they're the same exact size, and sometimes your fabric can stretch a little bit, especially at the top, this can happen. So what do? You take this and you just kind of very gently ease the outside of your bag in, because that is going to be where the fullness is. It's just the kind of the way that it goes, that it's usually your bag itself because of the way it's been handled. And again, because I have fabric and I have cork for the top. So I'm just very gently easing that in. When I take this to the machine and I put the yellow outside on the bottom when I'm sewing, it will help to ease in that little bit of fullness. So I have this ready to go. Again, this is my finished edge right here facing down towards the bottom of the bag. I'm calling this the right side. So this is right sides together with the outside, even though I don't technically have a right side to my cork. I have it clipped. I'm gonna take it to the machine, and I'm only gonna sew about 1/8 of an inch. I'm just basting this piece in to keep it from shifting when I get ready to put the lining in. The top is now basted in place. Before I add the lining, I'm gonna double check and make sure that everything looks good. I didn't feel that I had any pleats or puckers, but I just wanna check. I do want this to stay facing down when it's time to add the lining, but I'm just gonna kind of pull this up right now and look underneath. It looks like everything is straight and it's caught, and I don't see any puckers, so I'm good to go. So I'm going to, again, leave this facing down. You don't want to flip this up. This is part of the outside of the bag. And if you noticed as we've gone along, there isn't a lining part that looks like this, because this stands up by itself with the outside and the lining attached to it. So keep this facing down, grab your lining, and remember, the lining has a seam that's actually gonna go in the front. The zippered part is going to go in the back. And right back here, I have that little center mark that I had used for my zippered pocket. So I'm gonna line that up with the seam that I have here on my G piece. I'm gonna take my lining and I'm going to put the outside inside of it. It always seems a little bit strange, but we need these to be right sides together so that they are both right sides out when we're done. So I'm taking the G seam right here, the top, lining it up with the mark I have there. That was from my zippered pocket. And I'm gonna do the same thing, just work my way around, clipping that in place. And I'm using a few less clips because those pieces are already basted together. If you didn't baste the top to the outside and you were trying to do all 3 pieces right now at once, that is usually when you're going to have an issue because something is going to slide. And more often than not, it would be that top piece, my cork, because I can't really see it. So I would be clipping these together and the cork would slide down. That's why I like to baste it. So now that I have this in place, I'm gonna take it back to the machine and this time sew 1/4 inch. I'm gonna go all the way around 2 times. My first time, sometimes the clips get in my way and my seam allowance is a little bit wiggly. I also like to do it twice to make sure that everything here is caught. Because I'm going through the lining, the outside, and the cork top, I wanna make sure I don't have any surprises when I turn it right side out. So I'm gonna take this back to the machine, 1/4 inch, and stitch it twice. It's the moment of truth. Time to turn the bag right side out and hope that I have caught everything. I feel very confident that I did. I was checking as I went and it looks like everything is in the seam allowance. I stitched it twice, 1/4 inch. So now I'm going to reach through the opening in my pocket. This is why you left the opening and why you left your zipper open. And I'm gonna go ahead and just start working the bag out. And this is also why there's a big pocket in this bag, because I don't want to turn an entire bag through a tiny little opening. So I'm just going to turn, that turned really nicely, and come in here and kind of smooth that bottom out. I have not done any pressing to this point. I will go ahead and do some when I'm done. I'm just going to check this seam right here. It looks like everything is great. I'm really liking this combination. And I just think it's really fun to look into your bag and see a goofy print like bananas, because why not? So now that this is done, before I tuck the lining in, I'm going to close up this zippered pocket. So I'm just gonna pull this through the zipper, put those corners where they need to be, like that. And close this up. You can close it by hand if you like, but I'm gonna take it right to the machine, and all I'm gonna do is just tuck these edges under just like that. I can use a couple of pins or clips. Just tuck that under about 1/4 inch and close it. When it's done, I'll tuck it right into the zipper itself. And now, all I'll have to do is add my grommets, put my drawstring in, and I'm good to go. Before I head over to the machine to close up my zippered pocket, I'm going to take this piece with me as well. This is the drawstring tab. Since that's the last bit of sewing I have to do, I'm gonna take it all with me so I can finish it up. So I'm gonna stitch close my zippered pocket, and then I'm going to make this piece. So for the tab, it's very simple. I would suggest that you make it out of cork or even a vinyl if you're using all fabric. This is gonna get a lot of wear and tear, so I wouldn't do it out of fabric. That's just a suggestion. If you want to, you can do that. So what I did is on the back side, there's the right side of my cork. On the back here, I just marked my 2 edges here, a 1/2 inch from the edge, and I'm going to fold this down just like so, and stitch that about 1/8 inch along there. I'm gonna do the same thing here. That way I have nice clean edges on the top and bottom. Once that's sewn in, I have a center mark here, and I'm just gonna fold that this way, and now I have all nice clean edges, and I'll have 2 little openings for my drawstring. So I'm gonna head over to the machine and finish up sewing. So I closed up the lining of my zippered pocket. I just tucked it in and closed my zipper. And while I was at the machine, I did go ahead and add some top stitching right along here. If you are having any issues with your machine and the thickness, depending on what kind of materials you're using here, you do not have to do this top stitching. I did it on some of my bags and I skipped it on some of the others. I'm not super concerned about it. So if your machine is not liking some of this bulk here between all of your layers and your seams, go ahead and skip that. It's not worth the trouble. I just did about 1/8 of an inch. So now that my bag is done, I do not need my machine anymore. I'm completely finished with the sewing part, but it's time to add the snap together grommets. So I have all of my tools here for my snap together grommets, and that really just consists of a piece of fusible fleece. You can also use a piece of batting or a towel if you want. This is going to be used to keep these from getting scratched. And I have a rubber mallet. I borrowed this one from my husband, so it's a little bit dirty, but I do not know where my my mallet is, so I'm using his. So I've separated my grommets into 2 piles here. I have my male and my female pieces, and on camera they may not pick up and show the difference very well, but if you look closely at them, you can see that this half is a little bit smaller, that's the male half, and the female half has a little bit slightly larger opening, and there's a lip inside. It's not always easy to see, but you can feel it with your finger, and that's where these 2 pieces are gonna go together, and they're going to snap, and that's how it stops. So it's going to hook together like that. So I have them separated into 2 piles, and I use this cutting board right here so I don't worry about scratching up my table. So what I'm gonna do here is take my bag, and I've already cut my holes, and I can see, like when I look at this hole looks really big and this one looks a little bit smaller, so I might have to go in and trim that. It's totally fine. But I'm going to put these together just with my fingers in the holes, and then I'm going to take them back and hit them with the rubber mallet so that they're really secure. So by snapping them with my fingers, it's just so that I can test it and make sure that everything looks okay. So I'm gonna take one of these, and that's my larger half, so that's how I'm going to test the hole. So right here, that looks perfect. Let me take a look at this one. This one, I can squeeze it on there, but it looks a little bit small, so I'm gonna go ahead and just trim that a little bit more. And I might have just not done a great job marking. It does look like I trimmed away all of the pencil chalk line, so I might have just cut that one a little bit smaller. So I'm just taking a tiny bit off just to straighten that out. Okay, so I can test all of those with the side that has a little bit larger opening. And once they're ready, I'm just gonna put that right here, take one of the smaller pieces, and just click that lightly with my fingers, okay? I don't wanna put too much pressure in case I need to move anything. If I take a look at this and something looks like it's off or it needs to be moved, it will be easier than if I have already squeezed it really hard and it's kind of stuck in there. So this one looks really good too. And there's a little scratch on my grommet, so I'm gonna put that one towards the back. It's okay because it's a sample. So I'm just gonna do that. You might have heard that one snap. Sometimes you hear them and sometimes they don't. This one I did not get to snap, so it fell out, but there we go. And this is just temporary, just to keep this so that I can check everything. I'm gonna go around and put all the rest of them in, and once I'm happy, then I will go ahead and use my hammer here. I do have glue, and if you want to add extra durability, you are absolutely welcome to add some glue to these. So let's say that I do want to just add a little bit more. And remember, mine don't really get used because they're samples, but if you want to make yours really strong, just take a little bit of glue, just a little, goes a long way, and just kind of put that around one of your edges here. Get that out of the way. And then when you put this through, it's going to hold on to the cork, and then once it's snapped together, it's definitely not gonna go anywhere. So I'm going to work my way around, put all of these in and check them, and then I will be ready to use my hammer. all my grommets are secure. I went around and kind of tapped on each of those a few times. So those are all ready to go. So the last thing that I need to do is clip my handle on and add my drawstring. And I grabbed a couple because I wasn't sure what color I was thinking. And I'm thinking I'm gonna go with the black. I grabbed this rainbow one, but I'm not really loving it right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the black. So the way that I like to do this so it works out nicely is to kind of fold it in half and find the center. I'm gonna start at the back and put one side in each of these two grommets next to that seam. Pull that through, and then I'm just going to weave it in and out and back out like that. And done. So now I have my little tab here that I made. Trim a couple of these little threads. And I'm just gonna put one side through and put the other side. And before I finish this up, I do have my two little end caps that came in my Rue hardware kit. So these do not have any hardware either. There's no screws or anything. All you're gonna do is glue them on. So I'm just gonna grab my Gutermann glue, add a tiny little bit inside each of them. Little goes a long way because you don't want it spilling out over the top. And I'm just gonna slide it on to the end like that. And this one is a little crooked, so let me just straighten that up. And there we go. So now I can close that up and add my handle. And I'm done. My Rue Bucket Bag is all finished. Awesome. I'm really liking this combination. I wasn't so sure as I was going along if I was going to love the marigold color with the cork here. I liked it when I picked it out. I was a little unsure when I was sewing, but now I'm super happy with how this looks. I like how this came out with the wax canvas. Since the inside has the interfacing, I think it has a really nice amount of body to it. So I'm very happy with this. All I have to do is let the glue dry on my little cord caps and my bag is ready to use. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I can't wait to see how your Rue Bucket bags come out. Please tag me if you post them on social media, and you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'll have that linked at the end. Thank you.